The Madman!
Alright, and welcome to the neutral reviews from the Monday big card dump. Starting with Deadscale Knight. That's a 1-mana 1/1 Murloc. It has lifesteal, but boy is lifesteal pathetic on a 1-attack minion. Sure, you can buff it, sure you can do stuff with it, but it's simply not worth it. Acherus Veteran. This is the replacement to Old Abusive Sergeant, and by the way, that's +1 attack permanently. Seems like a really, really good card. It's not just for Zoo though, because the attack is permanent. You could see it in aggressive decks as well, and you probably will. It's a 1-mana 3/1, some of which is fast because of the battle cry. Wretched Tiller, 1-mana 1/1. Whenever this minion attacks, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Good news is you could theoretically get a lot of damage into your opponent's face. The bad news is if it doesn't attack face, it's a 1-mana 1/1. Terrible. Tuskarr Fisherman is an interesting take on Kobold Geomancer. 2-mana 2/3. Battlecry, give a friendly minion spell damage +1. So unlike the Kobold Geomancer, it needs another minion on the board. But as a benefit, you get an extra health. Here I have to think that the Geomancer is better than the Fisherman though, because decks with a lot of spells tend to not have that many minions to buff. Also, the Geomancer isn't really played that much. But Kobold Geomancer has, at some point in play, seen play in the most popular deck, Midrange Shaman. And 2/3 is a lot better than a 2/2. Tainted Zealot is another side grade on Kobold Geomancer, or you can even be compared with Bloodmage Thanos. As a 2-mana 1/1 spell damage +1, looks just like Thanos. Instead of Death Rattle, draw a card. It is Divine Shield. The Divine Shield makes it much more annoying to remove. But when you're comparing with Thanos, draw a card is almost certainly better than Divine Shield. Now, Kobold Geomancer only saw play alongside Thanos. I think Zealot will take the place of Kobold Geomancer if the spell damage effect ends up being that good. Vrygoul, it's a 3-mana 3/1 Death Rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, summon a 2/2 ghoul. Scarlet Crusader saw absolutely no play, and a 3/1 in which they deal 1 damage to you and you're left with a 3/1 is actually better than a 2/2. Plus, Scarlet Crusader could actually trade and was very threatening as a trade. So therefore, I don't think Vrygoul will see play. Also, Eggnapper was kind of the replacement to Scarlet Crusader, which was summon 2 1/1s, regardless of whether it was your opponent's turn or not. Eggnapper actually saw play recently in Token Druid lightly, and was better than Scarlet Crusader. Given that Vrygoul offers no benefits on top of that, seems like it won't see play. Drakkari Enchanter has a lot of similarities to Bran Bronzebeard. 3-mana 1/5. Your end of turn effects trigger twice. Just like Bran's, your Battlecry effects trigger twice. Now, the thing that Bran had going for it over Drakkari Enchanter though, Battlecry effects are much more prominent than end of turn effects. The only really good end of turn effect is pretty much the Lich King, which we'll cover soon. Everything else isn't really worth it. There's Mana Tide Totem, which is nice, but you can just play another Mana Tide Totem, and it's tough for your Mana Tide Totem to stay alive anyways. There's Ysera and there's the Lich King, which are great, but unlike Bran, you can't brand and play the other card. There's also Yasharaj, but that's 8 mana, 9 mana, and 10 mana. Basically, the thing with Bran is that you would play it with cheap battle cries, but there are no cheap end of turn effects triggered twice, other than Mana Tide Totem and Primal Fin Totem, which I think are not quite strong enough to use the Drakkari Enchanter with. Hyldnir Frostrider is a really interesting take, as it has a very interesting stat line. 3-mana 4/4. Battlecry though, it's a negative Battlecry. Of course, it would have a negative Battlecry because a 3-mana 4/4 would probably be too powerful. Freeze your other minions. Now the good news is that's not necessarily that bad a drawback if you're playing a minion light deck. If you're playing a minion light deck, this card competes with Targ Reaper, which is a 3-mana defensively 3/5 with Taunt. 4/4 doesn't quite manage to beat 3/5 with Taunt. It does combo with some of the Shaman freeze mechanics, which like self-freezing, which is actually only turned out to be Marabi, right? Which is why I don't think the Shaman freeze self mechanic is really going to pay off that much. Freezing your own minions, by the way, has a really subtle play to it that you may not be aware of. It turns out the freeze keyword is your minions skip their next attack. So if you play a 2-drop, and then, it's the next turn, it's turn 3 rolls around, if before you attack with your 2-drop, you play Hyldnir Frostrider, you skip that minion's next attack, and then as soon as you end the turn, it's going to be unfrozen and you can attack with it next turn. So if you would just go face with it, perhaps you skip the face damage with your 2-drop, and then you play Hyldnir Frostrider, and it works out. It's got some potential. Very interesting, hard to see fitting into a deck then. Night Howler, that's a 4-mana 3/4. Whenever this minion takes damage, gain +2 attack, so it's supposed to fit right into your warrior self-damage deck. But boy was this statted really understated. So 4-mana 5/3 is pretty bad. 4-mana 3/4 is pretty bad. It could be a 7/2, that's pretty bad. It could be a 9/1, that's pretty bad. Realistically, definitely not going to see play. Arfus, a really cute name for a really cute dog. 4-mana 2/2, Death Rattle, add a random Death Knight card to your hand. And these Death Knight cards are really powerful. They're pretty much as good as a Dream card is. What does that mean? It means even though you're overpaying on this effect, the card that you want to compare this to is Cabal Courier, a 3-mana 2/2, which discovers a card. Compared to that, Arfus is just 1 mana more, and it delays the draw as a Death Rattle. Those two things definitely do slow it down. But the card you're drawing does tend to be at least 1 mana over a normal good card. And it's also a beast, which means that you can get it with the Curator, which could matter for quite a few classes. The ultimate late game Build-A-Beast. Kinda is a card that'll depend on how slow the meta is. If it turns out to be a value-seeking meta, Arfus can fetch you a pretty good card. Keening Banshee, 4-mana 5/5. Wow. At the very small drawback of whenever you play a card, remove the top 3 cards of your deck. I think we've had enough of this debate already about Gnome Ferradu. It turns out that removing the top card of your deck doesn't really matter much when you're like an aggressive or mid-range deck. Because you're not a combo, you're not going for fatigue, you'll probably not hit fatigue. I'm saying this very seriously, and by the way, Fel Reaver wasn't that good because your opponent could also play cards to remove, and there were some decks that played a lot of cards where that actually did matter. But with Keening Banshee, you're unlikely to ever hit fatigue in any mid-range, or especially aggro deck. It can be considered to be a 4-mana 5/5 with a minor drawback, and I do mean minor. Now here's the problem. I thought a lot about whether a 4-mana 5/5 was even good, and it turns out that a 4-mana 5/5, while seemingly good vanilla stats, isn't actually that good. We're in a meta where there's a bunch of 4-mana 5/4s with significant upside. So that beloved Chillwind Yeti, even with an extra 1 attack, it perhaps isn't that good. But if this card were a 4-mana 5/6, the card would be insane. Just to let you know. So it's not the text. It's not you, text. It's your stats. Grim Necromancer, a big upgrade on Dragonling mechanic. The 2/1 is threatening enough that you use the hero power and get rid of it, and you're left with a 2/4. But when you have 2 1/1s, that's really annoying to deal with. And the sheer amount of bodies that you come up with allows for board-wide buffs to be pretty good. When you add up all the stats, it's a 4-mana 4/6, which is significantly better than the 4-mana 5/5. And it's even split up across bodies, which is both an upside and a downside, but mostly an upside. Will this see play? Because it has that many bodies, and because the base stat line is already strong enough? Deathaxe Punisher, 4-mana 3/3, which gives a random lifesteal minion in your hand +2/+2. So Grimy Gadgeteer unfortunately didn't see play, and it's a 4-mana 4/3, and it gave any minion in your hand +2/+2, not just lifesteal ones. That's the big thing about the Punisher. It's both a positive and a negative. You target specifically your lifesteal things, which are great because your lifesteal cards love to get buffed. But the problem is, there aren't that many good lifesteal cards in the set. The only great one right now appears to be Wickerflame Burn Bristle. Oh, an Obsidian Statue as well, but that's super late game. Trying to combo this card with the very few good lifesteal cards out there, it seems tough. So therefore, at the moment, I would say Deathaxe Punisher won't see play. Unless I'm severely misvaluing lifesteal, which I don't think I am. Grave Shambler is a 4-mana 4/4, which when your weapon's destroyed gets a +1/+1, also an elemental. Along the lines of how Keening Banshee wasn't that good as a 4-mana 5/5 vanilla. The Grave Shambler you have to time as you're about to use the last charge of your weapon, and then it becomes a 5/5. Yeah, it can become bigger, but it's pretty tricky. Has the elemental tag, which is nice. doesn't quite have a place, even if it might be pretty easy to pull off in Rogue. By the way, the text only applies when it's in play, and yes, by the way, replacing your weapon as the Rogue hero power does count. But even with all that, it's probably not worth playing in Rogue. Wicked Skeleton! 4 mana, 1/1! Gain +1/+1 for each minion that died this turn, so you want to play it right after your minions have traded against their minions. If 4 minions died on that turn, then you're getting a 4 mana 5/5. I'm starting to see a pattern here. But turns out that a 4 mana 5/5 isn't that good, and it's pretty tough to get with that specific circumstance where 4 minions die on that turn. No. That's a 5 mana 2/5 of Poisonous. We can kind of imagine, what if this were a 5 mana 6/5? Because once you get up to 6 attack, Poisonous is basically, 6 attack. That's about the same. And it turns out that a 5 mana 6/5 isn't good. So Venomancer isn't good. Skelemancer is a 5 mana 2/2, but it has the potential of summoning an 8/8. So that's a 5 mana 10/10. Now the only thing you have to do is to make sure your opponent kills it. Now they're not going to kill it voluntarily, but there are a lot of ways you can get them to kill it, mainly by putting taunt on it. When they kill your Spike Ridge Steeded Skelemancer, then very spooky things will happen to them because you'll get an 8/8 and a 2/6. Paladin doesn't actually have very many good 5-drops right now. They're even thinking about running Bolvar. It also does counter AoE, and it's a counterplay to Doomsayer. So this is a cool card design, and it relies on other cards to combo with it. Bloodworm, that's a 5 mana 4/4 lifesteal and a beast, so you can fetch it with Greater if you want to water down your deck with terrible cards. That's a 5 mana 4/4. In a world where 5 mana 8/8 exists, Bittertide Hydra, and a world where even a control 5 mana 6/6 exists, Corrupted Healbot, Bloodworm tries to make it stand, but it also gains you 4 health. I don't even know. Lifesteal seems to have gotten severely overvalued. But obviously they did a bunch of testing with it, and they thought that the lifesteal was that good. Anyway, seems terrible. Furnacefire Colossus, a 6 mana 6/6 with the battlecry, discard all weapons from your hand and gain their stats. Even on the baseline, it's not that bad. Obviously, playing a 6 mana 6/6 is bad, but it's not like absolute disaster levels of bad. Why would you want to discard your weapons from your hand when you could just equip them? Well, because you're saving all the mana on of the weapons. So this card can get really big. With discarding a simple Arcanite Reaper and a Fiery War Axe, you're getting +8/+4, so that's a 6 mana 14/10. With discarding a simple Doomhammer, you're getting a 6 mana 8/14. Really huge tempo plays are possible here. Warrior has a card that can feed the Furnacefire Colossus, very fitting. It's got Forge of Souls. For 2 mana, you draw 2 weapons. For a combination of 8 mana and 2 cards, counting the Forge of Souls as a card, you have the potential of getting a very, very big minion. And the nice thing is, Forge of Souls isn't even bad by itself. Weapons are certainly not bad by themselves. And this Furnacefire Colossus is a little bit weak by itself, 6 mana 6/6, but still not terrible. And against classes with hard removal, you can simply choose not to play the Furnacefire Colossus until you have no weapons in your hand, and then you play the Colossus. When you play a card, if you add enough stats to the card and you can play it fast enough, it actually turns out to be good. See Bittertide Hydra. In the same case, Furnacefire Colossus might be that very big tempo card that kills people. Draconid Crusher was played. That was a 6 mana 6/6 as well. It had the dragon tag, which was really important, but it showed the power of how a 6 mana 6/6, which can become a 9/9 on 6, to have been really powerful. That's a 6 mana 4/4 Spellweaver, spell damage +2. While it's a nice buff on Evolved Kobold of getting 2 more stats for 2 more mana, spell damage tends to be more of a combo thing. So Evolved Kobold was actually played because the mana cost was low enough. Spellweaver, though, even though it's bigger, which means it's more survivable, it will not see play. And we conclude with the big daddy of neutrals, the Lich King. So a strict upgrade on Ironbark Protector, a previously druid-only card, now can be used for every single class. At the end of your turn, add a random Death Knight card to your hand. And the Death Knight cards are on par with Ysera. So this is like a Ysera, which comes out a turn earlier and generates you that extra card every single turn. Now, there are a few pitfalls to this card before we automatically throw it in every single control deck, and possibly every single mid-range deck too. Some of the Death Knight cards aren't that good in control versus control matchups, whereas Ysera's cards are always good. Army of the Dead, which is an absolutely insane tempo card, in control versus control matchups where it'll go down to fatigue quite often, removing the top 5 cards of your deck is actually a major drawback. Doom Pact, while a 5-mana board clear is really good, removing cards from the top of your deck is a significant drawback in control versus control. And the reason why I talk about this being a serious drawback, whereas I didn't talk about Keening Banshee being a serious drawback, is because you wouldn't run Keening Banshee in a control deck. You would run it in a mid-range deck or an aggressive deck where you didn't care about the top cards of your deck. But in a matchup where going to fatigue is likely, these are drawbacks. But on the other hand, death gripping an opponent's minion out of the opponent's deck, that puts someone closer to fatigue and you're getting a cool card. That's an upside. So this card is really aggressively costed, probably because the Lich King wanted to be known as a very legendary figure. This is probably the Dr. Boom of the set, and I think it's actually powerful enough that it will see play in most control decks. Now the question is, will it see play in Paladin? Paladin already has 3 8-drops. Do you add another 8-drop? Or do you cut the weakest link? Kind of fits the same role as Ragnaros Lightlord, because Ragnaros Lightlord is meant to basically be a soft taunt and constantly heal yourself as well. Now this card is really comparable with Primordial Drake, and you could make the argument that, wow, Primordial Drake is actually being run in a lot of control decks. Lich King also will be. They're kind of in 2 different realms. Primordial Drake really good against aggro, since the immediate effect of dealing 2 damage to everyone, really good. Lich King, less good against aggro than Primordial Drake, but really good against control. Also, since this card is taunt, Stonehill Defender fetches the Lich King, which is a huge buff to Stonehill Defender, since Stonehill Defender typically wants late game options. So all of these Death Knight cards are really insane. I'd say probably the laughing sister of the bunch would be either Death Grip when you're up against an aggressive deck, or Anti-Magic Shell when you have very light of a board, which happens all the time since you'll probably be playing this in a control deck. A lot of very powerful tempo plays. Doom Pact, a board clear for 5 mana. Obliterate, painful, but maybe great. Death Coil is a really good tempo removal. Death and Decay is a really good tempo removal. And Frostmourne, that is a lot of value if you can survive the 3 turns. Given that the Lich King is also fast in that it has taunt, so it immediately impacts the board and stops you from dying. Seems like a great card, and this is the cue for Black Knight to enter back in full force. Because I know in the beginning of the expansion, probably almost everybody's going to be sporting the Lich King. Black Knight that thing for massive tempo gain. So there you have it. That is all of the cards of this expansion. Some very exciting ones, some really big effects. I think this expansion is the one with the most high cost cards. So let's hope we can get to the end game. And now we do the tough process of thinking up where all these cards go in decks, and then coming up with a rating system for all of them.